Despite what my videos might suggest, my favorite type of game based solely on game feel is the 2D platformer, the most vanilla video game genre, and by that same token, the most accessible, with my flavor of bias leaning towards Mega Man and Kirby. Any game where you're given a versatile pool of abilities that reward you for experimenting is what my young and highly medicated brain correctly considered peak game design. Bonus points if you can combine powers like in Kirby 64. These two, while not requiring the highest level of execution, encourages situational awareness with light puzzle solving. On average, these aren't that difficult, and as I get older, the ever-growing nostalgia compels me to seek more of these games out, compared to the endless hype machines that are character action games. Or maybe it's the carpal tunnel I got from DMC. So, today, I'll be covering another game requested by you, the viewer. Today's title was the developer's first game and a labor of love that took 7 years to make, Copy Kitty. Released in 2018 by Nuclear Strawberry, an outfit consisting of two people I can't find any information on. And after posting a funny little GIF to the group chat of my local internet cafe that specifically targeted their iOS devices, my investigative tools have been taken away from me because I lost my Discord privileges. Copy Kitty is a 2D action platformer, and despite how much it hurts my eyes, is what I'd consider a hidden gem. With its biggest draw being the sandbox style of combat, you're given a small handful of abilities that you must mix and match together in order to tackle the obstacles presented. There aren't any large interconnected maps. Instead, every world is broken up into a series of smaller encounters. This is like if Kirby had a spin-off that was essentially Metal Gear Solid's VR missions. And if it was just as insane. When starting up the game, you'll be shown a settings menu, and I immediately felt 10 years older because it reminded me of when I installed CD-ROMs on the old family PC. But it's very cute. Starting from the top, we play as an anthropomorphic cat, a Katerin named Boki, and she has the special ability to alter her internal chemistry, mimicking whatever she's currently fighting. But despite her power essentially being everything, this doesn't save her from adolescent angst. As compared to the tokusatsu shows she watches on TV, from her point of view, her powers are just not that cool. And based on her default ability, I'm inclined to agree. For context, the setting of Copy Kitty takes place in the My Hero Academia cinematic universe, where a chunk of the population possess many different flavors of ESP. These individuals are referred to as the Entama. The upside, superpowers are real. Downside, so are furries. The road to power is paved in sacrifice. They aren't eating Tide Pods or getting high from ingesting lethal doses of Benadryl for clout. Instead, xylitol is considered a Schedule II amphetamine, and the hazardous properties of a chocolate grape are enough to force a hallucinatory episode, psychically connecting the Katerin population to the furry redeemer himself. Boki, despite being a cat person, was adopted by bugs, and as a result of her inferiority complex, her uncle Savant gave her a VR military training program made to simulate fighting this world's version of the Borg, and it was backported to be compatible with her SNES, presumably because her uncle works for Nintendo. Savant created this hyperbolic time chamber to help Boki develop her powers, so she can realize her dreams of becoming a superhero. Yeah, I'm thinking Uncle of the Year. Also, as we fight through the stages, he's just here now. This is his domain. We're just playing in it. Now let's talk about the presentation. My gut reaction was comparing it to one of those early 2000s PC titles that I'd probably pick up at the Scholastic Book Fair, and from the premise to the graphics, it reminded me of Reboot. Oh, and if you're like me and you value your eyes, I'd recommend putting the effects to minimum. It's a mixed reaction, because on one hand, the game looks like this, and some of the visuals are what I describe as clown vomit, causing my eyes to glaze over as they roll in the back of my head. That's honestly my biggest problem with Copy Kitty, but I'd be lying if I didn't say there was an intent here. Through it all, everything is surprisingly readable. Yeah, at times it looks like it has bullet patterns straight out of Toho, but enemies indicate when they'll attack with visual and audio cues. You can tell which enemies drop powers and what kind. The game even bothers to mark certain enemies if they have certain properties, or if they're key targets. The UI does everything in its power to aid the player, and while it's a bit clunky, does actually help in the busier levels. And surprisingly, even with a game that can be as messy with particle effects, at no point did these indicators add to the clutter. You'd think it would, but surprisingly, it doesn't. The levels are designed in ways that it takes a good amount of degradation before the levels truly become a muddled mess. Again, stylistically it's not my cup of tea, but on the other hand, it's hard to not feel satisfaction with feedback like this. From the hit stops to the hit sparks, there's no ambiguity of whether I'm hitting something. They don't just evaporate into a puff of smoke, they die. They have ceased to exist. And while we're here, there are still some things that I really like. Did you beat a boss with low or high health? Did you beat a level with a high enough combo? To way more subtle things like Boki's idle animations changing depending on what outfit she's wearing, like when she's tapping her feet inside the ancient pharaoh's RGB pyramid. The environments also have a lot of things that stand out. We got parallax scrolling, weather effects that can empower certain abilities, destructible tiles. The environment is just as much of a character as anything else. This level of detail is a bit of a running theme with this game. There's even an encyclopedia that documents all the enemies, environments, and other world-building details that can help you learn more about the setting, with a surprisingly deep amount of lore about the world's history. Or you can simply spawn a bunch of enemies only to see them explode when you back out. It's fun for everyone. And while this next part may seem smaller in comparison, the flavor text is one of my favorite things in this game, not just because of the world building or because it's kinda cute sometimes, but because it acknowledges you, the player. I mean, the devs had enough foresight to put these small lines that address the things you've done or bothered to do. Let me explain. The first boss, I barely beat it, and while I won, Boki tells Savant she's disappointed in how much she struggled. But what if I did better? I win, but I don't get the challenge star because I took too much damage. Boki is less sore about the victory, but still doubts her own abilities. Now, I don't get hit a single time. Boki exclaims her excitement and triumphantly asks Savant if there's anything stronger to fight. A full 180 from the other two, but still in character. Fighting a hard boss? After losing multiple times, Boki expresses her frustration, and Savant gives her some advice. But if you died at least 6 times and decide to back out of the level, it uses its supercomputer-like calculations to deduce that this fight was undeniable proof that we totally own you lamers. Call them Easter eggs or what have you, but when the game bothers to make comments on the specific choices I made, it makes me feel warm inside. In a game where you're given hundreds of toys to play around with, it gives the player a sense of agency. Plus, it really does flesh out these characters, and these little bits of dialogue are the cherry on top. But moving on, the game's soundscape is fine. The actual effects themselves feel like they're made up of stock sounds, but you're mainly going to focus on 2 things: the enemy's audio cues and that banger soundtrack. The songs are good in their own right, a nice upbeat electronic soundtrack that could honestly be in its own Mega Man game, but what sticks out here is how adaptive the soundtrack is. There are a lot of factors that can alter the current track. Certain power-ups, being at low health, being underwater. Do you hear the trumpets? Or when the composer decided to use the Mario Paint sound font for that one boss fight. These are only a few of the factors that are meant to convey the devs' love for vertical mixing. It's hard for me not to crack a smile when the devs go this hard with the dynamic music. There's even a sound test mode on the main menu that allows you to tinker with some of the more dynamic elements. And even though it doesn't contain all the different kinds of mixing, there are dev notes here. I wish more games just had developer commentaries just baked in like this. Now let's get into the meat of the game. How does it play? You start a level, you're shown the targets at the top of the screen, and you select a power. But for a good chunk of levels, you don't get a choice. So before we discuss specific scenarios, let's talk about what's useful in every scenario. Let's talk about Boki herself. She has the most health out of the 2 playable characters, and she has a focus sash. After taking lethal damage with any number higher than 1, she can survive another hit. This tiny cat person prevents her own atomization through sheer willpower alone. And while it's nice to discuss the aura farming potential of face tanking, let's discuss something way more interesting. Boki's feet. Boki has 2 defensive options, a roll with iframes and a kick, the latter being way more diverse. The kick itself is fast and does decent amount of damage, it can be angled, and not only can you do this cool somersault, doing a downward kick in the air gives you this insanely fast dive kick. While relatively quick, the kick has startup, so it's not the best in close quarters, against the more melee-centric enemies. Instead, it's best used as a defensive tool. You can nullify most projectiles by just kicking them, or reflect them depending on the timing, and suddenly, the dive kick goes from a decent movement option into an anti-bullet initiation tool. If used effectively, the more congested levels can be cleared with some well-timed kicks. In the lore, Kataran appendages are biologically fused to rocks, depending on their gender, making them exceptional at digging. Aside from the horrible implications of childbirth, what this means for us is that most terrain can be caved into, giving the player way more dynamic forms of problem solving. Even the debris kicked up can damage enemies if you know how to aim it, but this should impart the game's biggest lesson in how much good positioning and environmental awareness are a key factor to not getting reduced to atoms. But now let's get to the main gimmick of Copy Kitty, your arsenal of abilities. The myriad of bullets are pretty straightforward. Force is your standard Mega Man Lemon with some decent tracking. Explode arcs a projectile that explodes on contact and clears soft ground. Lightning shoots lightning that has a wide spread. And Wave shoots a slow-moving projectile that can go through walls. 3 bullets can be combined at any time to use a special shot, for a total of 175 different combinations, which can be then augmented by the various body buffs you can find in certain levels. We don't have enough time to list all of them, so I'll just tell you some of my favorites. Remote Force Split, homing sticky bombs that can clear rooms like nothing else. Quick Plasma Tornado, which lets you do this. Good for deleting everything on that side of the screen. The Curse of Ra, and who could forget Explode Force Tornado, better known as the Dragon. But my favorite would have to be the Quick Lightning line of bullets. Or should I say, swords. They're not the strongest, not the most practical, and a melee weapon in a game where a good chunk of the levels look like this doesn't seem that good. But just like in Kirby 64, it's easily the coolest option. Forget practicality. All my choices in life have been dictated by whatever I think is the coolest. However, there are abilities that go against this combination gimmick. Solo powers are unique to certain enemy mobs. They have more utility than regular powers, trading consistent, reliable damage for more niche uses, and are overall less abundant. The upside to solo powers is that you can still use your combined bullets if they're in reserve, effectively giving you an alt fire. Originally, I would have complained about the lack of visual distinction between Boki using a solo power and the enemy using the exact same power, because this would cause unnecessary clutter in a game that's already a bullet hell. I retract that statement because all the solo powers in World 7 are some of the most cracked abilities in the game. Remember how I said you can't combine solo powers? Well, f that. The melee weapons in the castle may as well be the pieces of Exodia. As I collect more arms, I get closer to my final form. Boki is a zoner, if it wasn't clear already, but with the tools you have at your disposal, you can be very aggressive in your approach. Side note, the challenge stars. I love replaying the same map for over 30 minutes, only to bump into the one harmless clanker that for some reason has contact damage. It's enough to make a grown man crunch in his adult diaper. Savant makes a point to mention how these are optional challenges, but who are we kidding? No, they're not. If you tell me they're not required, I'm going to get all of them. In all seriousness, the only stages that are actually worth replaying are the boss fights, and they're generally the most fun encounters in the game. And you want to know why I stuck around? Not because the powers are fun, not because the story and the presentation are adorable, and not because Boki has a parry. Everything in isolation is serviceable, at least. The reason I love Copy Kitty is the context surrounding it all, both as a game and as a narrative. This game has some of the most schizophrenic balancing I've ever experienced, where you'll be playing a pretty standard run and gun level, and then you'll get thrown into a literal war zone with nothing but a Glock 26 you found in the dumpster. But it's not some Kaizo Mario level rage bait, it's a calculated encounter. After barely scraping by on a difficult level, dying to the same enemies, the same boss, after being put through hell, you learn the patterns, familiarize yourself with abilities, and play it smart. Then finally, the game throws you a bone, and when you finally get your footing, when you see the fated path, Copy Kitty understands how to give the player that cathartic release. And it's almost like the devs silently tell you it's time to go nuts. And after you kill a boss with their own power, you realize that it's an invitation. What you've just had was a taste of things to come, and you'll ride that high, wondering what else this game has to offer. Copy Kitty is somehow one of the best power fantasies I've ever played, and it's about a superpowered teenage cat that eats rocks. It's in that sweet spot where it demands just enough to be a challenge, and if you put the time in, you'll learn how to take the heat, and actually get satisfaction from winning, especially in hard mode. In most other games, higher difficulties mean the exact same enemies in the exact same situations with inflated stats. Yawn. But after beating the first 12 worlds, the game goes, I sure hope you enjoyed that 3-hour tutorial that was normal mode, because the real game starts now. What did they mean by this? Well, I'll tell you. New levels with new enemies, remixed music, more lore about the greater setting, and more importantly, new abilities. When presented in a video format where all the information is being force-fed to you, this game can seem intimidating, but it doesn't have to be. The early game is paced well to get you acclimated to the more questionable levels, and 9 times out of 10, just pick whatever you like, because this game isn't that complicated. Copy Kitty isn't gonna quiz you on the viability of 107 different bullet combinations. Copy Kitty is a box of toys, and you can either go to the shiny new plaything or just stick with what's familiar to you. This game is just fun. Now the last thing to cover would be the game's story. Without spoilers, it's a heartwarming coming-of-age story, as the narrative mainly follows Boki's arc into accepting and even embracing her own abilities. It's like if Sky High was actually good. So if you want to avoid spoilers, then go to here. Savant acts like Boki's mentor throughout the stages, not only encouraging her when she does something well, but also tries to instill a sense of discipline in how her fights can affect the people and places around her. He makes this point by having one of the constructs you fight violently explode and starting a forest fire. The best part is that when starting hard mode, Savant really posed the question, what if our actions had consequences, and left the simulated forest a deformed marsh. We mainly get exposition through the dialogue at the start of some levels, and more often than not, serves as light world building, with the notable events being tied to boss levels. What matters here is Boki proving to herself that she has potential, even if she still has a hard time believing it, compared to the constructs and even the cybers themselves, which can be seen as a dark reflection of Boki's character. Ignoring the fact that many boss fights consist of constructs fusion dancing together and stealing the abilities of others, the main antagonist of the normal levels actually has abilities similar to what Boki used in the past. The glowing lights on the side of him also visually look similar to Boki when she has a full combo meter. This all comes to a head when discussing the final boss of hard mode, when the comparisons become way more literal. Isotope was a former Katerin and Tama, and with the help of another mysterious cyber, invades Boki's VR machine. The stakes have been raised, and to cap off this point, even before her strogification, Isotope had the ability to manipulate matter on an atomic level, something with limitless potential, but as a cyber, to put it bluntly, all she cares about is splitting the atom. Without Savant's guidance, this is very much where Boki could have been, and the fact that Boki could not only match, but beat a full-blown cyber is a huge boost to her ego. She gains her confidence, and she uses the events recorded by Savant as a way of applying to this world's version of the JLU. And that's where our story ends. For now, unless Nuclear Strawberry decides to make a sequel. It's not the deepest arc, but what it lacks in complexity, it makes up for in charm. It's a relatable struggle, comparing yourself to those around you, only negatively seeing your unique qualities is something that makes you different, and despite what the presentation might suggest, her growth as a character is more subtle than you'd think. The encyclopedia really sums it up best. Boki's ability doesn't create a one-to-one of whatever she copied. If she takes an ability from a weak opponent, her power only gets stronger by comparison, but if she fights a stronger opponent, the power gets altered to a version Boki's body can handle. It was right there all along. Boki didn't just have the ability to copy those around her, but to transform them into something unique to herself. You could see this as analogous to the developers themselves, wearing their inspirations on their sleeves, and making something transformative in the process. In the character action game sphere, there's a term when in cutscenes your character is a combat god, and doing things that make the current level almost look trivial. While it does leave a sort of disconnect between the player and the character, it's something that you, the player, should strive to be. The game is promising you that by putting the work in, you will become cutscene Dante. It wasn't about the places she went to, the enemies she fought, or the abilities she used on her journey. It's your skills that improved. In a meta way, both you and Boki shared the same journey. As you improved with Boki, she became more confident in turn, until she became her own cutscene Dante, embracing the title of Copy Kitty. You can feel the childlike wonder that was put into a game like Copy Kitty, inspired by all the things you thought were cool as as a kid, brought to life through the blood, sweat, and tears of Azure and Ribus. And I didn't even mention Savant's campaign, the workshop support, and all the other alternative game modes that need to be completed before you can fight God. Copy Kitty is a highly replayable and charming title, and I only regret that it took me this long to review it. I'm convinced that furry developers are some of the most cracked people on the planet, as video games are the only medium where they're allowed to show off their power level. I realize this isn't for everyone, but if you can look past the game forcibly dilating your pupils, you'll find a solid little title with a lot of soul, a lot of content, and a lot of heart. I highly recommend it. But if you're still skeptical about the price, and seeing how I'm probably gonna upload this after the Steam Summer Sale, the game normally goes on sale for less than $5. I can't even get 2 McChickens for $5 anymore. That's almost 35.5 hours of pure joy that I promise your local fast food joint cannot provide for the same price. Also, the developer is currently making another game that I know nothing about. That is all. Thanks for watching. Like always, let me know if you have any recommendations for games in the future by commenting below. The next game is going to be slower paced, but I'll enjoy it all the same. Take care of yourselves, and see you next time.